Hey everybody, this is Rudy for Bester Investor or Mr. Oxy coming at you live from West Palm Beach, Florida. It is Monday afternoon, October the 26th. We just saw the Dow drop 650 points. We saw Occidental Petroleum drop back to $9.50. Carnage in the marketplace today. So let's talk a little bit about energy, oil, natural gas, coronavirus, and election 2020 in the United States. Some people have asked me questions about the coronavirus, and I've kind of copped out and said I'm not going to have an opinion on that or offer an opinion on that because I'm not a politician. But I did do a little bit of research, so let's kind of see what I came up with, and hopefully you'll stay with me until the end of this particular presentation. So the first thing we want to talk about is coronavirus. So I'm going to kind of step to it and give you my thoughts about the coronavirus and where we are today. This is the world map of coronavirus as per the New York Times as of today. Now, the coronavirus impact is quite an interesting sort of observation if we just look at the map. The hotspots for the coronavirus seems to disproportionately affect just a few countries. We have the United States, obviously, the world leader in all things including coronavirus. We have Colombia. We have Argentina down here. We have some European countries, most of them in fact, and Libya. So the rest of the world is either significantly less impacted than the United States, or otherwise they don't do as much testing as the United States, or otherwise they simply can't count. And that last comment is obviously not true. So you have to assume that either they are not as much impacted as, for instance, the United States or Europe, or otherwise they're not testing as much. The fact of the matter is, like President Trump has said on many occasions, the more you test, the more you find. The irony is that for the majority of people, they wouldn't even know that they had coronavirus if they hadn't been tested. So that in itself kind of gives us an indication as to how afraid we should be of COVID-19. So when President Trump says, have no fear, people in the media mock him. But at the end of the day, why should you fear? Maybe the question is, what should you fear? So I titled this particular slide, Facts Matter, and then unfortunately extracted information from the New York Times, who has proven themselves to be the worst purveyor of what we would call facts, probably in American history over the last few years. They are just awful as a propaganda mag or rag, but I'm going to use these numbers anyway, because actually, as it relates to coronavirus cases, they would say they are just reporting, and in this case, they are just sharing the news as opposed to making the news, which is what they are usually trying to do. So, according to the facts, the coronavirus pandemic has sickened, which is an interesting term, more than 43 million people, according to official counts. Now, their source in this particular instance is the CDC, which is, of course, in itself at least somewhat questionable. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist. I'm just basically posing questions as to the numbers and are they actually correct. What about the number crunching? So if you talk about 43 million people and a global population of approximately 7.8 or almost 8 billion, then the coronavirus pandemic has sickened approximately 0.55 or about 0.5% of the entire globe's population. When you think of pandemics like the Spanish flu in 1918, which they are obviously always using as a threat in terms of this particular pandemic, if you look up a Monty Python sketch, you'll find an interesting sort of sketch related to the Spanish flu, where one guy walks with a cart down the street and says, "Throw out your dead, throw out your dead." You know, that's kind of unfortunately what a pandemic looks like. To date, I still don't know anyone directly firsthand who has been impacted by coronavirus, which is not unusual because it's just 0.55% of the global population, and I don't know 43 million people. And in addition to that, as of Monday morning, which is as of today, at least, according to the official numbers, 1.154 million people have died, which is very, very sad, but at the same time, that represents 0.148% of the global population. So when I say I don't know anyone who has actually contracted coronavirus, I also obviously definitely do not know anyone who unfortunately passed away from the coronavirus, other than stuff you read in the news or the occasional celebrity or something like that. So for what it's worth, I agree with President Trump that you should have no fear. This is a pandemic. It is not a life-threatening pandemic, and the numbers of people who die every day from diseases like tuberculosis, diarrhea, diabetes, cardiac arrest, hypertension, etc., far exceeds the number of people who die from coronavirus. So I'm not saying ignore the numbers, and I'm not even saying, like me right now, you shouldn't wear a mask. If I was wearing a mask, you probably wouldn't hear what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that perspective matters and facts matter, and even though I'm quoting New York Times figures here, the facts are that the numbers are so small it's almost irrelevant. What about global energy? We have a unique situation because this very pandemic I was just speaking about is causing a massive crunch in terms of global demand. You could probably add to that global supply is over the top because demand is so limited. So what I did was I looked at some global construction projects as it relates to oil and gas. Currently, hydrocarbon processing is tracking nearly 1,400 projects across the world that equate to approximately $1.8 trillion in capital spending. At more than $630 billion, the Asia-Pacific region represents 35% of active capital investments, the US about 300 billion, and the Middle East about 300 billion. So these three regions collectively or together represent 65% of the total active project market share in terms of global construction projects for oil and energy and natural gas today. Where are these projects located? So I just mentioned three major areas, 300 billion in the United States, 635 billion in Asia Pacific, and almost 300 billion in the Middle East. However, let's not ignore more than $100 billion in Canada, almost $200 billion in Eastern Europe, a nice, huge, hefty investment of $200 billion in Africa, and that includes some of your favorites and mine, like Occidental Petroleum and Total and Royal Dutch Shell, and every major player is involved there, and $50 billion or thereabouts in Latin America. Lots of oil and gas and energy projects underway right now globally. Alexei, and I'm going to try his last name here, Volskaya, from Russia, sent me a little note or comment on my YouTube channel. He said maybe this would be interesting for you. The Russia Central Bank just changed their mind on oil prices ahead. Now they think prices will be $5 per barrel higher. This is Urals he's talking about in 2021 to 2022, which is more than what they previously thought. It is interesting, he says, because the Russian budget depends on the oil price. Obviously, Russia is an oil-based economy, much like many other countries are, like Saudi Arabia or most of the Middle Eastern countries, countries like Canada, countries like Venezuela, very, very oil dependent, and the higher the price, the better the economy. So Alexei suggested that I only need to translate the last line. I managed to find the last line translated by Google, my friend and yours. It says the average price for Urals crude in oil, US dollars per barrel. Currently, they said from a high of $64 in 2019, we had an average price of about $41 in 2020, and we expect $45 for the next 2 years before it moves up to $50 in 2023. So that is what the Russian budget and the Russian central bank is basing their forecast on. Thanks for the information, Alexi. Thanks for sharing it with me. And yes, I did actually look at that entire economic data sheet and translated a few lines as best I could using Google. Thanks for sharing. So let's take a look at Russia. COVID-19 caused an unprecedented decline in demand. Well, we kind of already know that, right? So I found this article via Hydrocarbon Processing, which is the publisher of what I'm sharing with you. However, it also triggered an increase in demand for polymers used for food packaging, cleaning, hygiene products. Russia has unique advantages because they have access to low-cost feedstock and proximity to demand-rich Asian countries, including China and the European markets for the supply of petrochemical products. You know, just the other day I was watching the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and Joe said, he wants to open the economy too, and restaurants should open, and they should just put plexiglass between the tables. And Joe, at the same time, obviously wants to ban fracking. So it's kind of amusing that he wants to put plexiglass between tables when plexiglass is actually a petrochemical product. But anyway, I guess facts don't really matter when you're talking about politicians. And then there's China. Just in Kazakhstan alone, China has currently 55 projects that they've invested in, which equals an amount of 27.6 billion. So if you're not familiar with Kazakhstan, look at it on a map. It's a tiny country, and China has 27.6 billion invested there in oil and gas projects, 55 projects at the last count, which is as of today, according to China Dialogue. And then I looked a little deeper and said China's economic miracle has seen the country become the second largest economy. Well, we all probably know that. And it pulled nearly 1 billion people out of poverty, according to Carbon Brief. And that progress was built on a boom in energy from coal. Oh, gas, my goodness, we're destroying the environment. And China is leading it because China is the world's largest carbon polluter by far. Coal accounted for almost 60% of China's energy use. But China is a massive consumer of oil, and most of it is based on coal, and most of that energy consumption has lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty. So now you get into the classic dilemma of, are we doing good or are we doing bad? How about India? India's total share of global primary energy demand is set to roughly double to 11% of the entire world by 2040, says British Petroleum, or BP. India accounts for more than a quarter of net global primary energy demand growth between 2017 and 2040. So India is rapidly catching China in terms of its growth. 42% of the new energy demand is met through coal, meaning that CO2 emissions roughly double by 2040. Now, while I'm on the topic of CO2, just remember that CO2 is life. Farmers, including farmers who use CO2 to increase their yield, are just part of the consumption group, including energy companies like Occidental. So farmers use CO2 to improve their yield, especially in greenhouses. They pump CO2 into the greenhouses, and companies like Occidental Petroleum use CO2 now through their carbon venture capture in order to improve their yield and at the same time obviously capture CO2. In India, gas production grows, but it fails to keep pace with demand, implying a significant growth in gas imports. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, because it is October, and it is almost the end of October, and on the 3rd of November there's going to be a US election. And what does that entail, and what about energy? Well, let's go back a little bit in history. Generally, the United States was self-sufficient in energy up to the early 50s under President Truman, who was a Democrat. So my goodness me, but the Democrat Party has changed in the last 70 years. In 2019, total energy exports were greater than total energy imports, and the United States became a net total energy exporter for the first time since 1952 under President Donald Trump. a Republican. That's a bit of a dilemma, because now, going back in history, I might have been sort of the proverbial JFK Democrat in terms of my general leanings, but in 2020, as an energy investor, I kind of have to lean a little bit Republican, because Joe Biden has said several times he's going to ban fossil fuels. However, he's also said several times he's not going to ban fossil fuels, but Biden. What does the US energy consumption look like by energy source? Well, look at that. Only 11% is renewable energy in the world, and the United States is actually a world leader. But it's worse than that, because almost half of the renewable energy is from biomass, which literally just means burning down trees in order to create power. If you don't believe me, oh, now I sound like a politician. If you have time, you'll find this little video of mine in my library. It's called Fossil Fuels, the End of the World, and Other Fairy Tales, where I talk a little bit about biomass. You know, at the end of the day, almost everything we do, including this presentation I'm making right now, and if you're watching it on your mobile phone or your TV or whatever it is that you're doing, everything around us is powered by fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is going to stay with us for generations. So this is currently our consumption. So anyway, this is what we're using. This is a good source. It's like the United Energy. Anyway, that's kind of my take on that. This is what we're using. And then Biden had to backpedal on fossil fuels. Why did he have to backpedal? I mean, we have several videos of Biden saying he's going to ban fossil fuels, he's going to ban fracking, he's not going to provide any more subsidies. Well, the problem that Biden has in this regard is that, like, almost the entire United States has some kind of play in terms of shale or, deep drilling, deep water drilling, West Texas Intermediate, the deep sea drilling in the Gulf. The United States energy play is so huge and, employs more than 2 million people. So can you really just say, like, well, are we going to ban fossil fuels just because you want to make sure that you don't alienate all the Green New Deal supporters and the left-wing liberal maniacs who tweet that we should ban fossil fuels while they are charging their cell phones made by Apple with fossil fuel products from an electrical source powered by fossil fuels? I mean, come on, man. This just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But anyway, I'm actually in a good mood. So let me go to the last slide. Trump versus Biden. Well, this is the media prediction, and it's just a small little slide that shows you that Biden is always in the lead, and almost purely for that reason, I'll say Trump wins. Okay, it's not that simple. We know in 2016, for instance, the media told us time and time again that the probability of Hillary Clinton winning the election is almost 85% or 90% or whatever, and Trump won. I think Trump will demolish Biden. I think the momentum is behind him, and I think this is going to be an overwhelming electoral college victory for President Donald Trump in 2020. If it isn't, and Biden wins, I don't feel, overly threatened or particularly fearful about that, even as it relates to energy, because Biden has a 50-year history of doing nothing. So he doesn't really actually scare me. So in that respect, I'm somewhat indifferent. But anyway, there's my prediction. We're a few days away from the US election, and I've just said it, in case I hadn't said it before, and I don't think I have. But yeah, my prediction is Trump wins. So guys, on that note, this is Mr. Oxy signing off on Monday the 26th. That's my take on COVID. It's my take on energy. It's my take on the US election. Thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you like my videos. And if I've said anything to offend you, too bad. And if I've said anything you like, please comment. In fact, if I've said anything to offend you, you can comment as well. You know by now that I comment on almost anything that you say. So I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for watching. Take care. Stay safe. This is Mr. Roxy signing off.